Were I born a man, I could bear Tim if I wanted. I could father a dozen bastards, and no one in your court would blink an eye.
You're right. But you were born a woman.
But what if she wasn't? It's no secret that Westeros is very biased when it comes to things like gender. For hundreds of years, it's mainly been men who held authority and power on the continent of Westeros, with some exceptions here and there. It's a common belief in the kingdoms that a son always comes before a daughter. The Princess Rhaenys, when she was younger, is a prime example of this. Despite her father being the eldest son of old King Jaehaerys and her being his only child, and therefore the eldest descendant of Jaehaerys, she was passed over in favor of her uncle Baelon. And after he died, there was a great council held by the realm to decide the next ruler. In the books, she wasn't even considered as a potential candidate for the throne, but her son Laenor was. And while she was actually considered in the show, the end result was very much the same as in the books. Despite having a valid claim, the Lords of the Realm chose her younger male cousin Viserys Targaryen to be the next king of Westeros. And this favoritism towards men does not end with her. Rhaenyra Targaryen, despite being the king's only child for many years, was never named heir by her father for this exact reason. Like many Lords of the Realm, he too believed that men had to sit the Iron Throne after him. It was tradition, precedent that was reaffirmed by the Great Council of 101, and in his eyes, it was also prophecy. He was plagued by dreams that one day he and his wife Aemma Arryn would have a son, and that son would sit the Iron Throne one day. Though it wasn't meant to be as the king's son, Baelon would only be his heir for a day. It's no secret that one of Rhaenyra's biggest weaknesses in the eyes of Westeros has been her gender. It's because she's a girl that many look down on her as a potential monarch. As Otto says,
"It wouldn't matter if she were Jaehaerys himself, born again. Rhaenyra is a woman."
no matter what she does or who she is, it will always be undercut by the fact that she is a woman. She's under a lot of scrutiny as a result, and the attitude and reckless behavior she displays early on in the series does her no real favors. Because Rhaenyra is a girl, she doesn't often feel seen by her father, and believes she's not enough for him early on in the series. She's been alive for 15 years, and yet having a son is his top priority. Rhaenyra is also envious of the freedom men get in society. Men can have bastards with little to no consequence. They can hold lands, titles most of the time without resistance. They can become knights and ride off to battle and win glory, be acknowledged by the realm for next to nothing. Rhaenyra often remarks about these things in the story, mostly when things aren't fair and aren't going the way she wants them to. She seems like she has a conflict with her gender at times. Not to say that she hates being a woman, but she hates how powerless being a woman can be in Westeros. And so she compares herself to men, compares herself to her brothers. Aegon specifically in earlier years because he's
the boy you always wanted.
She hates that she can't be that, be enough for her father and the realm, simply because she was born a woman. This is the entire reason that the dance even happens in the first place, because there will always be those who believe a son comes before a daughter, a brother before a sister. In canon, she says, "I will never be a son." But what if this wasn't the case for Rhaenyra? What if she was able to get everything she wanted from day one? The freedom, the power, and respect she was wrongfully denied just for being born a girl. What if Rhaenyra was born a boy? We'll set the stage in episode 0, a time before House of the Dragon takes place. The year is 97 AC. Aemma Arryn, wife of Prince Viserys, who has yet to be named king, is in labor. Viserys is at her side, holding her hand and listening to her wails as she tries her best to deliver their child. He's worried. This has been going on for hours, and it's clear his wife is in a lot of pain. The Maesters are doing everything they can, but he's unsure of how things will go. So he begins to pray to the old gods, the new gods, to any god that will listen.
I swear to the drowned god, the old gods, the new gods, to every fucking god in every fucking heaven,
to let the pain of his wife pass and for their child to be safe. Eventually, his wish comes true. Emma's screams become exhausted pants, and soon the room is filled with the cries of a newborn infant. After tending to the child, the maester approaches young Viserys and Aemma. "Congratulations, my prince. You have a son." "It's a boy?" Viserys asks, trying to contain his excitement. "Have you and the princess decided on a name?" "Aegon," the prince responds, naming him not for the conqueror, but for his younger brother, who died when he was a child, just short of his first name day. It's a way of honoring him, the life he did not get to live. His father Balon would surely approve, no doubt, since he's still alive in the year 97. He has 4 more years until he dies of a burst belly. So, for the time being, the realm rejoices at the birth of a new Targaryen. With the birth of a son to Prince Viserys, this gives him a strengthened claim to the Iron Throne years later. During the Great Council of 101, a decision was made to decide who would succeed Prince Balon as heir to the throne after his death. In the canon timeline, Viserys was chosen over Princess Rhaenys and her son Laenor because he was the oldest living male Targaryen. And now, with the birth of a son to him so early on in his years, who has also survived his infancy, the bloodline of Viserys seems practically assured. The Great Council votes in this timeline are even more favored to Viserys now since he's a male with a male heir. And now there won't be any questions or concerns of the throne passing on to the Velaryons should Rhaenys become queen. Rhaenyra being born a boy in this timeline changes a lot of things. For starters, since Rhaenyra, Aegon in this timeline, is born the only son of King Viserys and Queen Aemma, there is no question about who the king's heir truly is. There won't be any debates from day one. After Viserys ascends to the Iron Throne, his succession is set. And I don't see many, if any, resisting this because men are largely preferred in Westeros, and now the king has an undisputed male heir. One of the biggest obstacles in Rhaenyra's way, aside from the Greens, was who she was born as. But now that problem doesn't exist anymore. So that whole dilemma of lacking a true, uncontested heir that Viserys goes through in the early parts of the series does not exist. It was settled years ago before this was even an issue. So the primary concern for Viserys is ensuring the survival of his heir and making sure he comes into his own as a man and future ruler. In canon, Viserys kept Rhaenyra pretty close at court, making her his cupbearer so she could get a front row seat when it came to politics. Even though earlier on he didn't have any serious plans of handing off power to her until the situation was dire, he didn't want her to be ignorant of certain things. He'll keep this same energy with Aegon, but I don't think he'll make him a cupbearer. Being a boy opens a lot more doors for the new Aegon than it did for Rhaenyra. For starters, he's actually allowed to train in combat. He can wield a sword, raise a shield, hold a lance, and be knighted. He can march off to battle and win glory like Canon Rhaenyra wished to do.
You will lie in this bed soon enough, Rhaenyra. This discomfort is how we serve the realm.
I'd rather serve as a knight and ride to battle in glory.
So in this scenario, Viserys' son will most likely become a squire instead of a cupbearer. We'll say he probably becomes a squire to Daemon, since he is a renowned warrior and head of the City Watch. This could mean that Aegon gets involved with the City Watch from time to time. Another change that could come from Rhaenyra being born a boy is Aemma. One of the driving motivators for Viserys in the early parts of the series, as I've already mentioned, was his obsession with having a son. He was haunted by dreams of a male heir, sitting the Iron Throne, wearing the Conqueror's crown, and wrongfully assumed that this boy in his dreams was his son with Aemma. This obsession with his dreams and need for an heir drove him and Aemma to conceive numerous times to the point where the strain on her body was just too much. And when the time came, Viserys had to kill his wife to save his child. But that won't happen in this timeline. Since Viserys got a son so much earlier on, he'll be under less pressure as a king who needs an heir and a man tormented by an unfulfilled prophecy. With a living son on the cusp of manhood, there's no real need for him to be so desperate for heirs when it comes to Aemma. They pretty much have everything they want, so there's no need to push her body so much like they do in canon. Now, that's not to say they won't try to have more kids, because for a king to have only one heir is kinda risky, considering anything could happen to any one of them at any time. The reign of King Jaehaerys the Conciliator is a prime example. He had over a dozen children, and many of them died as infants, children, or well into their adulthood. No one, not even the Targaryen bloodline, is untouchable. So there will be questions. What if something were to happen to Aegon before he can make a child of his own? What if they had no other children? Sons mainly, since in this timeline they wouldn't even consider a female ruler inheriting if the king has a functioning male heir. Who would the throne pass to? Daemon? Sure, he's popular with some of the people in King's Landing and the City Watch, but some people, like Otto Hightower, don't think he's actually suited for the role. He's brash and impulsive, has no hesitation when resorting to violence, and seems to have little to no respect for Westerosi culture and tradition. I mean, this is the guy who openly cheats on and insults his first wife, Lady Rhaenys. So I do believe that Viserys and Aemma would be encouraged to have more children to secure the succession, because just having 3 Targaryens in the main family through Viserys, Daemon, and Aegon is not the best move. And while I do see them trying to have more, it won't be as obsessive and important as it was in the main timeline. Viserys was king for 10 years without a clear heir, so having a son was vital. But, as I've already mentioned plenty, with Rhaenyra being born a boy, he has that from the start. So while he and Aemma will try to strengthen the family line, it won't be as important to them as it was before. Things would be so much easier for Aemma and her body as a result of Viserys not trying so hard. So it could be entirely possible that with less strain being put on her, at some point she may very well be able to have another child without the risk of her own life. But we'll keep things in line with canon for the time being and say that Aegon will be an only child like his counterpart Rhaenyra. But this time, it'll probably stay that way. If Viserys and Aemma are just content with Aegon being their only child and the king's heir, this obviously means that Aemma won't die from pregnancy complications, meaning she gets to live and there won't be a power vacuum in the royal family that people like Otto and Corlys try to fill by marrying their daughters to Viserys. Another change that we'll see is that with Aegon being heir, this means that Daemon will never be heir, or in line for it. There won't be any heir for a day jokes that get him exiled this time around, so he gets to stay in King's Landing a bit longer with Mysaria. Something interesting to think about when pondering this scenario is the relationship Daemon will have with his nephew. Assuming that Daemon prefers women to men, you can remove that whole romantic plot he originally had with Rhaenyra. Instead, we could replace it with a more mentor and student kind of role since Aegon is his squire. It may even border on father and son to a degree since Daemon doesn't have any children of his own yet, which is an interesting thought. But let's really get into how the story changes with Rhaenyra being a boy. So many scenarios really just get erased on the account of Rhaenyra's gender flipping. Assuming Aegon isn't like Laenor in which he prefers men, this means there will be no romance with Daemon, no romance with Criston, or Harwin Strong for that matter. So all of those relationships that really put Rhaenyra in jeopardy do not exist. Now it is entirely possible that Aegon still has some traits from his feminine counterpart where he does sleep with people outside of marriage. Aegon II did it, Aemon did it because Aegon pushed him into it, Viserys and Daemon did it when they were younger.
Still you say nothing.
What does it matter, brother? When we were Rhaenyra's age, we fucked our way through most of the brothels on the Street of Silk.
We were young men.
And with Daemon being his mentor and Aegon possibly being involved with him and the City Watch, just seeing how they get down in the show, I wouldn't be surprised if Daemon tried to make a man out of his nephew at some point by taking him to a brothel, like Aegon also did with Aemond, as I mentioned earlier.
Aegon brought me to the Street of Silk on my 13th name day. It was his duty as my brother, he said, to ensure I was as educated as he was.
And since Aegon is a man, there wouldn't be much scrutiny on him if he did go down this route like there was for Rhaenyra. If people found out, they may be disappointed and see Daemon as a bad influence, but it wouldn't jeopardize his position as the heir. Now, as an unwed, dragon-riding male Targaryen and the heir to the Iron Throne, it would be imperative that Aegon gets married. He'd be around 15 years old at this point, and a prime way for families to get into power through him. So I believe that the conflict we saw in Season 1 of House of the Dragon, where Viserys has to find a new wife, now falls to Aegon. Since Aemma is alive and probably won't be having any more kids anytime soon, it's kinda important that the heir starts making heirs of his own. So I'd argue that there's gonna be more pressure on Aegon than there was for Rhaenyra to produce results, as he is the only child with no siblings to fall back on. Sure, there's his uncle Daemon, but he's a wild card. So instead of Viserys, Corlys and Otto will probably be pushing for their daughters to marry the prince. Corlys would most likely bring up the idea to Viserys to unite their houses by marrying Laena to Prince Aegon, while Otto probably uses the same tactic he did in canon to trying to get his daughter Alicent to endear herself to Aegon, which I honestly doubt she'd even have to do. She and Aegon would be around the same age, and assuming the two of them are close like Rhaenyra and Alicent were, it wouldn't be that hard for them to fall for one another naturally, especially when it comes to Alicent. She's not being pushed to marry some man old enough to be her father and rotting from the inside out. It's a boy her age, potentially her best friend at that. someone she may already have an interest in, and vice versa. So if it's left up to Aegon to choose who he wants to marry, it's most likely going to be Alicent. And this time, no wars are going to be fought over the prince's decision. Corlys can be mad about it, but what's he gonna do? This marriage could end up being a much happier one for Alicent, since she'd be marrying her best friend, not his dad. Alicent will become queen later on in the story than she did in canon, of course, but it will be under much better circumstances. And on that note of better circumstances, she may have a better relationship with any children she and Aegon have in the future. In canon, in her early years, Alicent was very much a fish out of water when it came to her children. She loved them, but she did not want them, at least not in the manner that she had them. She didn't love Viserys in the romantic sense, but she did her duty all the same. It took her a lot of time to truly adjust to being a mother, and it's clear that she does care for her children and love them, but she does still get very out of line with them, especially when it comes to her son, Aegon. But that could be different now. Since she's marrying someone she may actually want to be with, she may be more open to having kids and being a mother, viewing it as more than just a job that she needs to get done. And with Aegon potentially being a decent guy with a loving father and a loving mother, without any siblings, assuming Aemma stays alive and Viserys doesn't need to remarry, or anyone with a reasonable claim that could challenge his right to the Iron Throne comes along, I think this timeline could be rather peaceful for the Targaryens. Aegon will eventually ascend the Iron Throne as the second of his name, and the dance is left for another day for a new generation. So with Rhaenyra being born a boy, a lot of the conflict that she initially goes through gets cut out in my opinion, since the main reason people went against Rhaenyra wasn't just because she made questionable decisions, but because she was a woman. Remove that factor and any possible competition through overzealous siblings, the Targaryens probably don't tear themselves apart, at least not yet. But with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed the video. Don't forget to like, comment, subscribe, and I will see you all next time.